Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Relays podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Jesse James Fain, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hey everyone, I am Jesse James Fain. I go by the Outlaw Author because the branding writes itself. I write fantasy, military fantasy, urban fantasy, military sci-fi, pretty much anything that I can squeeze a gunfight, a fist fight, or a sword fight into, because that's what I like and that's what I like to do.
All right, and as you know, if you're watching the title of these episodes, it's a short story for a short podcast for a short story, and today we're talking about Jesse's story in Deadly Flames: Dragons in Combat, a Bayonet Books Anthology, Volume 11. But before we get started, I do have to ask you the religion questions tailored specifically for the topic of dragons. Are you ready?
I am.
All right, Aragon, Ring of Fire, or Damsel?
So, Aragon definitely has a longer, more complicated story, but I'm going to go Reign of Fire. The cast in Reign of Fire was fantastic. The dragons still look good to this day, in my opinion. And doing the whole thing with the helicopter and the guys jumping out of the helicopter and the net dragon was awesome. So that's my pick.
Outstanding. All right. And because we were polytheistic, the last Dragon Slayer, Dragonheart, or the Dragons of Camelot?
Dragonheart. I think other guests of the show have mentioned, Sean Connery, but not just that. It was a good movie. That was legitimately a very interesting tale, well done, and it was a great take on the knight and the dragon.
Yeah, I did. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that one. They weren't actually enemies. It was just a show to get people to donate money. That was just genius. They don't write. I don't know. I'm nostalgic for some of the older films. Modern films, it's just like plot. Who needs one? We'll just throw some shiny CGI.
Yeah. And it's worse. It's worse now. It's worse than it used to be. At least in my opinion, the CGI's gotten worse. I can think of movies in the early 2000s that had better CGI than some mainstream shows do now.
And more than that, I think somewhat the acting has fallen because of the CGI, because you don't have to be a dramatic actor anymore. You just show this shiny thing and you don't have to sell it with just like the body language of the actor, and I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah. That's
why some of the best actors coming out of Hollywood these days were once trained for the stage, because they didn't have those, they didn't have the technology to prop up bad acting as long as they had a pretty face.
Fair enough.
And I really dig that. Of course, we could go on forever about our rants against the shoddy storytelling of Hollywood, but then we'd never air this podcast. So instead, I'll ask you, Knights of the Damned, Wyvern, or Dragon Fury?
Stunningly, I have not seen any of those, so I'm going to say The Hobbit. I think that Benedict Cumberbatch was the opposite of what we just talked about, was a really fantastic dragon. I think his role as Smaug was really cool.
Absolutely. It's a good movie. I know it gets panned because you took a one book and made 3 epic movies, but then for 3 super long books, and it's a rather short book, The Hobbit, I mean, and then instead of 3 super long books, you just did a movie each. The time ratios were off for some people, but
no.
I mean, I think both can be good and still say I wanted more from the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
All right, in case you missed it, dear listener, dear viewer, all of these are themed after dragons because we're going to be talking about his story in Deadly Flames, Dragons in Combat. So before we get started, I will do my worst movie trailer voice and guy impression. Rest assured, sir, your job is secure for one more day. And with that, prepare for a fierce battle as you step into a world where dragons clash with courage and ferocity. In these 17 gripping tales, heroes rise and fall, facing fire-breathing foes in epic confrontations. Each story unravels a unique conflict, from desperate towns defending their homes to warriors seeking vengeance. Meet the brave and the foolhardy, each with their own motives. Discover the price of power and the cost of survival. Will they conquer the flames or will they be consumed? Join the fight. The dragons await and the stakes are deadly. They got me thinking, I wonder what dragon steak would taste like.
If it didn't kill you, I imagine it would be really gamey. It'd probably be a lot like other big predators, bear, stuff like that. Bear's probably a little more fatty. Might be close to alligator. Alligator's actually pretty good. So
Yeah, I was thinking close to alligator or close to snakes. And snakes, tried it, didn't like it, but I know people love it.
yeah, I know. There was a group of like paleobiologists that got asked the question of like what T-Rex would taste like. And what they came to is it was probably pretty bad for your health because things like heavy metals tend to move up the food chain. So something that a carnivore that big would carry enough metal in a steak to possibly be toxic for you. So I just thought that was
And then
interesting.
factor in if it can breathe fire, what
Yeah,
other things are in its composition to make it be able to do that, essentially liquid napalm. Well, I
yeah.
guess napalm technically is liquid, but anyway, like everything that gives it its power probably adds to the toxicity levels.
hmm
That would be interesting to have it be poisonous.
I went with something kind of like that, honestly, in the story. So a little bit different, but
And then, of course, you get the standard trope where they take the dragon scales and somehow make armor out of it. That would be interesting. Although that would almost be light armor, just because you're essentially talking about leather.
yeah, dragon scale kind of defies logic in that way from the normal material and nature that it's somehow supposed to be so tough that it's hard to penetrate with anything, but at the same time, it's not 85,000 pounds. Um, and that's weird because other animals that we see like that, like boar and things like that, they're just thick. Like there's not anything that super special about the biology of it. It's just thick and covered in mud and nasty and takes a lot of force to get through. So who knows?
Yeah, and in Skyrim, the Elder Scrolls famously has the where you can make iron armor, or excuse me, dragon armor, and for them it is light. It's
Yeah.
considered a light armor instead of something heavy like a plate, which kind of makes sense if you look at the, it's essentially animal skins. So it'd be interesting. And then a lot of the lores will have where you can use their components of the dragon to make, magical concoctions and whatnot.
Yeah, I
So
mean, if they're full of that much magic, you want to harness it.
absolutely. And then in some, the heart is valuable, or the heart is actually some sort of stone. I've seen that before too. There's a lot of lore in dragons. But speaking of dragons, what was your story in this anthology titled?
So it was Fire in the Land of Wolves, which is a very targeted name, specifically because I often refer to the pirate crew, the air pirate crew, as two-legged wolves. And of course, the dragon brings the fire.
Okay. Could you give us a quick synopsis of your short story without obviously spoilers, because we want people to read the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Fire in the Land of Wolves is actually technically a sequel. It will stand alone. Read it on its own. Read it first. It's perfectly fine. The other story with the same main character, his name's Rune Red Eagle, will be out at some point in another JR Presents. But basically, Rune has found himself at the head of a very vicious air pirate gang. This is set in a alternate Civil War universe where the Civil War just kind of petered out, and the Confederacy and the Union and other nations that have formed from this conflict are trying to figure everything out. Um, so Rune's found himself at the head of this, but Rune is driven by a inner demon, an inner beast. He's a mix of berserker and skinwalker myth for anybody that's familiar with those mythologies. And the inner beast tells him that he has to prove himself, that he needs to be the apex predator. So instead of taking them raiding against other ships, Rune's heard about a bounty on a dragon, and that's where Rune takes his new crew. Well, what happens from there, I'll leave for people to read the story.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us about, like the temperament of Rune, that make the story pop for you?
So Rune's really personal to me. I grew up going to powwow. As anybody can tell by the hammer around my neck, I also have Norse roots. And so Rune's definitely a combination of all of the different mythos that I grew up with. And so his temperament is very um, quintessential warrior, but at the same time, he cares about people. He cares about the people that he's supposed to care about. He has a sense of group, of pack. Again, this wolves thing comes on. The pirates, however, are exactly what you would expect from pirates. They are greedy. They're nasty people. They murder and steal and everything else and torture for a living. And Rune in the tale beforehand had to basically conquer them by violence. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with is Rune is pressured by this pirate crew, even when things maybe look like they're not such a good idea. The greed keeps pushing people forward, and Rune is trying to simultaneously protect the people he feels he's responsible for, but continue this fight to prove he's the apex. He's caught in a real complex spot.
So, what was the inspiration for this particular story? Obviously, there's a story that chronologically happens before this one that'll be coming out. I think it's Fires of Retribution, um, which will be coming out with Three Ravens Press. But like, what was the inspiration for this take on your character?
Um, so I got really lucky. I got really lucky. So it's actually Cogs and Cutlasses is what the first run will be in. And
Okay.
you had posted up on Facebook. You were like, "Hey, I need some air pirates." And I was like, "Okay, cool. I'll figure it out." But I really wanted to write something with that personal take I had talked about earlier, and that's kind of how Rune got started. So Rune's just kind of traveling, minding his own business. When this whole air pirate thing kicks off and he gets drug into that. But that what Rune had been going to do, and this was just total coincidence. What Rune had been going to do in the story that I wrote in first draft was Rune was going to meet people to go after this dragon because that's Rune's motivation. What apex predator is there that's bigger than a fire breathing dragon? I'll wait for somebody to have a good answer, but it's not there. So that was what Rune wanted to do. Rune was always going after the dragon. And the complications along the way are just what turned the tale kind of sideways and made him have to deal with things. Um, as far as the tale that you'll read in this one, at this point, Rune is still going after that goal. So that goal has not changed.
So obviously, this main character is in two short stories. Do those two short stories exist in a larger universe?
Yeah, so Rune is my Conan, is the best way I can expect it. Which, if anybody's been watching the show, they know Conan's a huge influence for me. So Rune is going to travel all around. All of the tales open up with Rune going back to his adopted mother and father. And he has all these little nieces and nephews. And Rune has finally come home after being gone for years, and each story starts off with them basically bugging Rune to tell them about what happened on the road. So each tale starts and ends with, Uncle Rune, tell us about the dragon, or Uncle Rune, tell us about what happened. And of course, the first time he drives up, they're like, "Hey, man, where have you been? What's been going on?" So this is going to be a repeat thing. There will eventually be a novella where I have to dive deeper into where Rune's ancestry comes from, things that happen in the wider world. This will absolutely get a whole lot more attention, as long as I can get people to keep publishing them.
So you were going very much on the 1,001 Nights kind of vibe, where it's all storytelling within the larger story. So story within a story, basically.
Yeah, I don't do the actual like huge quote paragraphs where the characters are telling the story in the story. I do keep it third person, so the scene will change, and then you see what happened, and then the scene changes back to Rune finishing up telling what happened.
So you're definitely channeling in the famous Conan quote from Schwarzenegger. The purpose of life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women.
Uh, I in spirit. So Rune doesn't tend to be that. Well, Conan doesn't really tend to be that verbose either, but Rune tends to be very laconic. He tends to kind of just keep it to business most of the time until he's either really annoyed or trying to make a point. And then that's when a little bit more dialogue will come out. There's a lot of sub themes. Rune's dealing with his own version of post traumatic stress from everything that he's been through. He's dealing with not really feeling like he belonged anywhere in the world. He's dealing with a fractured world that has, like the United States itself has stayed split. So there's a lot of that going on, a lot of him seeking comfort in family um, between these tales of violence, revenge, and the greed of men.
So in your alternate world, like, did you let Texas become its own country? Because if you didn't, they're gonna riot.
Yeah. So that is Tex. So Texas and the Mormons with Utah um, are having a so far civil dispute. The nation's people, the Native Americans, are because of the presence of magic and things like that, are holding their own a lot better. They've still moved out. They still moved out west. There's new coalitions, new tribes because of all that intermixing. But with the presence of these supernatural events, it allowed them to hold their own against superior technology and things like that. The Union is still as fired up as ever to put the country together. The Confederacy is still struggling and having to rely on foreign aid. I try and do a lot of alternate history with it, but still keep a lot of, what I feel personally as an amateur historian, the real life would be like.
Okay. So you're keeping it so there are enough cultural touchstones that people still recognize it, even if it's slightly different than our reality.
Yeah, absolutely. That culture was a big drive in Rune's world because he's caught between them. Um, it's kind of given away right at the beginning that his parents are killed during the war. He's the lone survivor of his family. And there's a lot of real life things that happened in the Civil War that left a lot of people that way. And between being mixed and being, on his own, Rune really struggled to find home, and the only home that he found was in this old inventor's shop. I call him the old man. And the old man is a second dad to Rune. And that if you've ever felt like you were really struggling to find your place in the world, Rune is going to feel very familiar. He's loving at times and finds this one place of comfort, but everywhere else, anytime he steps out the door, it's conflict.
Okay. Um, at some point in time, you said you're going to come back to this universe. Is it going to follow the same Conan character, or are you going to tell other stories set within the same space?
I haven't decided yet. Rune is definitely the main focus right now, and if I get lucky and this blows up and people want me to start expanding and they want me to keep it, to keep doing more here, I have plans for Rune that tie into some of the other projects that I've teased on here. My Holy Diver in the Midnight Sea series can pull from any time, any place, and Rune is special. He is supernatural. So there's ways that he can tie into other stories and get pulled into some of my other novels and works and things like that. But if the demand's there, I'm always happy to start expanding more on this world. Right now, the world does center around Rune as far as my storytelling is concerned.
Okay. So what subgenre, other than the dragons, what subgenre would you classify your story in?
It's a steampunk tale. There's airships. The pistols are, I call them heaters, which some people actually call regular pistols heaters in real life. But heaters are steam-driven pistols. They're semi-automatic steam pistols. There's all kinds of steam wagons, and I tried to take the steampunk. I tried to take the steam part of that as far as I possibly could. As a power driver, it's weaponized. Not to spoil anything, but that's one of the best ways that they basically come up with to deal with the dragons. Um, it's got some horror elements to it. It definitely takes some inspiration from Aliens, as far as that's concerned. Um, and there's going to be a lot of me trying to mark my twist on the genre, just like I tried to mark my twist on the mythos.
Okay, so what is it about the steampunk aesthetic, since that seems to be the overarching one, that appeals to you, both as a creative and a reader?
I love mixing science fiction and fantasy. That's a huge thing for me. Is these and that's another purpose of, again, the other project, Holy Diver in the Midnight Sea, is to mix all that together. And Rune does that too. So we have this world where like mythical creatures and magic wands, where all these things exist, and steampunk allows you to do this really fun. It's modern, but it's still kind of a western. The place that it occupies in time periods is really awesome. So it's almost like World War II level technology, sometimes even better. But it's all powered and focused around this very like old west feeling technology source. And so that's really what I think is really cool about steampunk, is you get to tell an old tale, but still have flashlights or something similar, still have modern conveniences, trains, wagons, basically cars. Rune rides a motorcycle. He's got a steam cycle. That's the big joke is it's his Indian motorcycle. And so that's what I love about that setup, is I can still kind of pull elements from everything into one place.
All right, and since we promised a short podcast for a short story, dear listener, and we aim to deliver, we've got two more fun ones for the road. So if you could live in this world, would you?
Oh, I younger me would have. I got kids now. I got family, and I'm not sure I want to drag them into this. But if you had asked like 21-year-old Jesse, hey, you want to step through the portal? Yeah, um, I would have learned magic. I would have hunted monsters. When I was, still huge from powerlifting and all the MMA and everything like that. When I was still a fighter in more than just mind, I would have done it.
Would you have ridden into battle with Rune?
Yeah, I'd have probably died. There's a Rune has a survivability scale. He's a lot more. I don't know if anybody will get this joke. Rune has a lot more Bear Grylls than me. I'm about 1.5 Bear Grylls, and Rune's much more like 150 Bear Grylls. So um, he 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 has a way to live through things that other people don't, which is part of the point of this tale, which would ruin more if I went into more detail.
Okay. And if people wanted to check you out, obviously we'll throw a link to this anthology in the show notes, but if they wanted to check you out personally, where can we find you on the internet?
You can find me at outlawauthor.com. That has a link to everything else. That's kind of its purpose. Don't get me wrong, you can find my books and stuff there too. There's some cool artwork, things like that. But the whole purpose is to get you to my Substack, my Twitter, my Instagram. All of those are either going to be my full name, Jesse James Fain. The Substack is Outlaw Author, though you'll find it with my name, of course. And then at Jesse James Books is Twitter. You can add me on Facebook too, but as I warn everybody every time, that's my personal page. That's tattoos, that's guns, that's my personal beliefs. So that's not going to be quite the same as my personal page. You're still welcome to come hang out.
All right. And dear listener, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, maybe the Twitters, the Spotify, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We've got our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We have, for professional purposes only, save the shenanigans for Madam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitters, and the emails. You can support the show at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till they snort the grinds out of their eyeballs. That would be kind of gross, actually. Don't reuse them, people. And if you use the link in the show notes for Coffee Brand Coffee, the code is podcast grunts. Get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. And since this episode, because the short ones are airing for the first available non-normal publishing date after recording, if you're listening to this later, the TikTok maybe is referenced to. We don't know if they're going to let that stick around in the U.S. or not. So it's kind of up in the air. But at some point in time, maybe we'll get answers. It could happen. Don't give me that look, Jesse.
I think TikTok's going to be fine. I think that the people that want TikTok to be fine aren't going to be happy with the fact that TikTok's fine. But that's a whole politics thing we're not going to get into.
All right. Well, with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time. We'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it. Don't cuss yet, Jesse.